Welcome back to the harbor. I'm your host, the Kino Cowboy. I'm here with my co-host Scott Keith, and we've officially entered the Halloween season. I thought we could do another John Carpenter, but maybe a little bit off the beaten path. In the Mouth of Madness from 1995, 1994 in Germany, starring Sam Neill, in a film that isn't talked about as much as his other classics. Well, I don't know if this is a classic, but it's certainly an interesting watch. And this was my first time, and I believe your first time as well.
Yeah, we're both. It probably goes without saying we're both Carpenter fans on
Yeah.
this podcast. We've previously covered The Thing. Go check that out. That's one of our more popular episodes. This was my first time seeing this, and it's when I heard the title, I thought I even started calling it in my head "At the Mountains of Madness."
Yeah.
Which is the Lovecraft novella that the title plays homage to, which was my first hint. And then I pretty quickly found out that this is Lovecraftian horror, which fortunately is something I've actually read quite a bit of. I had a pretty intense Lovecraft phase in my early teens, and I've read cosmic horror since then, like Thomas Ligotti and others. And I, am also into all that other pulpy fiction, which is why I can wax poetic about Conan the Barbarian on that episode, because Lovecraft and Howard, who made Conan, were colleagues. This movie is it's a trip, and it is all about reality or lack thereof. And it's might be the best adaptation of Lovecraft, despite not actually being based on Lovecraft. It might be the movie with the best depiction of Lovecraft and cosmic horror that I've seen, or at least his
Okay.
style of cosmic horror in a lot of ways.
I I found this movie to be kind of a mixed bag, but overall a fun time. And
It is a mixed bag. And I
yeah.
understand because at first, really, even before we get to the town, where it just goes crazy, it just ramps up very quickly once we get
Yeah.
to the town.
Yeah.
But that first act is probably when I was most intrigued with it.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like as the movie goes on, it's like there's not enough plot developments. There's not enough plot beats to breadcrumb along because I already kind of had the movie figured out, and I think part of that is my familiarity with this subgenre. And it's just I think if you're I don't know, movie nerds like us, you can kind of figure things out pretty quickly. But I understand if you're, seeing this in 94, a year after Jurassic Park, Sam Neill's now a household name, and you're just an average moviegoer going to this horror movie, and then you're like, what the heck is this? Which this released in February, I realized. It was kind of dumped in February. Which I wonder what that says about how the studio had their faith in it or something for a horror movie, or maybe the calendar was just crowded. I don't know. Um, but I understand why people. This is a 53 on Metacritic, so I understand why it's kind of mixed reviews, even though I would rate it more highly than that.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
because this does I could see somebody saying this devolves into a bunch of just jump scares and surreal imaginings and scares, which I'm cool with that, just going along for the ride. But I feel like plot wise, if you're into, figuring out what's happening or getting answers, this movie's definitely not for you in that case.
Yeah. I kind of wish it was a little bit more of the mystery element. Kind of,
Of him unraveling the mystery, you mean?
yeah. And I like movies when they ramp up, but I almost feel like maybe, I love the creatures. I love what he does with special effects and violence, but I think maybe just a little more grounded psychological take on this kind of a story where you're not sure what's fiction and stuff could have been a little bit better, but I don't know. Because
Do you think, well, Sam Neill's character, John Trent, he's the only one we see for the most of the movie who's grounded psychologically. He's a skeptic. He's a doubting Thomas the whole movie. That's his character.
Yeah.
Longer than most people would be doubting Thomas's. It pretty much takes a guy blowing his head off in front of him to be like, okay, this is real. It's like when Steve Martin gets shot in the Three Amigos, and he's like, guys, it's real. It's real.
Yeah, I did like that of like, oh, these are just special effects,
I even
animatronics.
thought it's the character says it, and I thought it earlier in the movie. Like, what if this is all a marketing stunt? Oh no, our author's missing, and we had to hire a not even a private eye, an insurance investigator, which is
Yeah.
another interesting. Um, it's a way to make this man seem very cut and dry, and he's into reality. His entire job is figuring out lies, and I guess
Yeah.
that's a difference between casting a private eye. Is that they're trying to solve mysteries. This guy's trying to solve lies. People just straight up doing fraud. So
Yeah.
that's his approach for everything is debunking. So that's what makes him different than a private eye or an exorcist or any of your others, and just kind of cast him as a no nonsense. Although it is weird, and this is intentional. It seems like he's never heard of this author, which is like if you had never heard of Agatha Christie or J.K. Rowling. If you're like Harry Potter, what's that?
Yeah, in
Um,
this world, he sold 1 billion copies and is in 80 different languages, which is just like, Harry Potter and shit like that. So
yeah, that is
maybe he's just that much of a workaholic.
well, they even say, listen, the guy's name is Sutter Crane. And at one
King.
point, they're even like, he's outsold Stephen King. Don't even think of Stephen King. It was like, so this guy knows Stephen King, but he
Well, no,
doesn't.
see, I found that lame because at first it was like, okay, Sutter Kane, Stephen King, that's the whole thing they're doing here.
They
I
kind of
get,
say that they kind of sound similar.
and it's like them directly making a reference to Stephen King, I felt was not needed instead of
I
just
think it
like,
was needed. We're in New England. We're in the Northeast, which is also where Lovecraft wrote. New England. Is it just a hangover from the witch trials that horror is so prevalent there? I think it's that. There's a lot of small towns, little hamlets tucked away in the hills and stuff.
yeah,
It's cold and misty, the climate. And then also, I think there's that residual genetic memory of all these Europeans coming over and they're on this new continent and they don't know what's in the woods. They have no, it's kind of like The Witch, the Eggers movie, is like they're just not knowing what's in the woods, having a very spiritual, religious kind of mindset, thinking that there's actual witches and demons there. I guess that's just in the memory of American horror. Like Poe was from Virginia, right? I think so. You have a lot of that, but I feel like the Northeast and like New England in particular is kind of the nucleus of all that. And then you
totally.
get out west, you get more into like you start getting to almost like Native American supernatural horror, and then into like folk monsters and things like that. Versus there's a more satanic witchcraft vibe in
Yeah,
the
totally.
Northeast, you know. And we got like the folk monster and like the stuff like that in Arkansas. We
Yeah,
got the Mothman.
me and Parker, she wanted to watch one of those older Scooby-Doo movies, so we put on Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that same kind of like my mom didn't like me watching that one because it was like Wiccans and witchcraft and stuff. And it's like, oh no.
But she was
But
okay with you watching the sexy cat ladies on Zombie Island
hell yeah.
and turning you into a furry.
Yeah.
I like
But
that one. I also like the really pandering one, Cyber Chase, where they get sucked into a video game. Because I was like, oh, they're in a video game. I do those things. I'm a child. I'm 11.
that's yeah, that's the crazy part is like they start off solving mysteries, grounded mysteries, and it's like now Zombie Island, the monsters are real, and then they edge it up a little bit, and they're like, there's a witch in this witchcraft story, and
Yeah,
then
now there's aliens. There's
and
the
now it's
alien
jumped, and
invaders.
now they're like getting put into a computer. And it's like, okay, maybe
Yeah,
we
no,
went a
they're
little
going
too
full
far.
Tron, which, by the way, speaking of Tron, one of my favorite character actors, David Warner, shows up very early in this movie. He is Dr. Wren. He's the recipient of most of the story.
Yeah,
David Warner, who has this kind of implacable British accent. He's from Manchester, but it's just a little unique. Um, It's a little, even though Manchester's very, I think, working class, it's a little bit posh. And David Warner, he also plays Dr. Baxter Stockman in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze.
Oh, okay.
And he's also like the computer guy in Tron who like makes the Master Control program. I think voices the Master Control program.
Okay.
So, when I saw him, I was locked in. I was like, all right, we're gonna get some secret ooze or some computer program. I
Yeah.
don't know what's happening, but I'm down with this movie. Um, and we immediately see Sam Neill um in this asylum set that I really enjoy.
I
How
love the architecture, the white
stripped
walls,
down and bare and Alcatraz like this place
weird
was.
angles, and like those old analog controls with the Muzak playing and stuff. It was like, yeah, this is a great
Yeah, it was just
direction.
your classic asylum. Looks like they shot it on location. Doesn't look like a set. Might be, but it doesn't look like it.
The main
Uh,
guy who runs it looks like he could be like a mad scientist, basically. I don't know.
yeah, well,
He's kind of has that look.
he's a great actor. He's perfectly cast. His hair's gelled up, not too
Yeah,
much to be unrealistic, but enough. He's wearing a bow tie, so he's kooky.
yeah.
Bow tie is I don't know, on the kookiness and level. Where does it rate around the fedora in relation to like?
It's it's a little bit low. I'd say
It's
two
lower. It's
two
both
steps lower.
physically and like neck beard levels lower. You know,
Depends. If you're like a one of those black Muslims, then you can wear a bow tie because that's like their thing.
they can't. Can they not wear neckties if you're Muslim?
I'm just saying, like, it's just like a thing. Black Muslims wear bow ties a lot.
You mean like Nation of Islam guys wear bow
Yeah,
ties a lot?
yeah.
Okay, I wasn't familiar with this part of their doctrine.
I'm just saying, like, that's just like a thing.
Are
But
there
if you're like,
are neckties made of pork and I'm not aware of
I
this?
don't know. But if I hope our friend Justin isn't listening because he likes bow
Dude, no,
ties.
because he's a nerd who wears a necktie, and
He wore
but
a
he
bow
has a
tie to
chemistry
prom.
degree, so he can do it. He's not faking the funk. Because a necktie, you have to have a personality. Like, if you're a serious businessman, you can't have a necktie. I'm expecting a real tie. But if you come at me with bow tie energy, I'm like, why are you wearing a necktie? And vice
Yeah,
versa. If you're wearing a bow tie, I want bow tie energy. I don't want necktie energy. If
yeah,
you start talking to me about like stocks or something,
yeah.
like, no, I want you to start talking about like molecules or so. I don't know, whatever. Like, you need to, like, if we're having a beer, you need to like break down what's happening chemically with the fermentation process in the hop. Like, that's the energy I want if you're a bow tie
You
guy.
have to be like a 60s comic book scientist character.
Yeah, no, if you're wearing a bow tie, like, if you don't say formula at least 3 times in our conversation, I'm gonna be disappointed.
Back to formula.
Back to formula.
Well, yeah. The
So we're in this asylum. There's some great shadow work, a lot of characters' faces and shadows throughout this. John Trent, Sam Neill. They said they gave him one black crayon, and he somehow covered all of the walls and himself with crosses. So I thought that was the most unrealistic part of the movie for me. I don't know about you. It took me out that he got that much from
the
one
crown
crayon.
was actually like a comical, like stage prop sized
Yeah,
crayon.
like the clown pencil, like one of those, like the
Yeah.
pencils they use for like rehab patients who just went through like a car wreck or something. You know what I'm saying? I could like have the big crayon and like draw how you're feeling. It was like that. They gave him one of those. He just drew crosses everywhere. Um,
Which they don't really get into that much.
because the script for the movie said he should do it. That's why it was a rewrite.
I was kind of expecting there to be some sort of like more in-depth
No, he's just doing
satanic kind
crosses because
of.
he's crazy, and that's what crazy people in movies
Yeah,
do.
that
They
was
write.
like
It's a
I,
bit
I,
generic.
I totally thought that was like a setup for more.
But also, I feel like this is a scene from like an airport horror fiction novel, Like that's what this is.
Hey,
This
that's
is
true.
it's airport horror fiction, but it's like more and more Lovecraftian. And the way they describe Stephen, or no, what's his name? Sutter Kane's, not Stephen King. Sutter Kane's careers, like, it's become increasingly unhinged, almost the way they're talking about with each of his books. Even the head of his publisher of that publishing company is like, I don't have the stomach to read him, even though he's their biggest author. He's like the biggest fiction author in this world. who I don't even think Sutter Kane maybe existed until fairly recently. And
Well, I
that
guess
there
if
might
this is the well, if he literally calls himself, I mean, he's calls himself a hack writer, people are calling him a hack writer, then I guess maybe this movie's review proof. You can't call it a hack because it was all intentional.
well, that's the thing. You could argue that. I wouldn't say that's a good defense, but you could say any of the part of these plots that seem trite is because it's borrowing from mainstream horror fiction.
Yeah.
And at one point it's Styles tries to kiss Trent after he's like driving away. And he's like, it must be a rewrite or something like that. He even acknowledges that like things are being rewritten and reality is being manipulated.
Yeah.
Which some people are, I think, in discussions of this movie and any reality bending movie like this, are trying to find the base reality. Um, I think base reality even is changing. I don't think that this is a new reality layered on top of a base reality. I think that base reality itself is being changed by these cosmic forces.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Well,
Um, because I think in terms of like Lovecraftian fiction, so they say at one time the elder ones. He says making the elder ones return, the old ones. Excuse me. When he says the old ones, that is a direct reference to Lovecraft, and the old ones include Cthulhu, Azathoth, Narlathotep, all of the elder gods. It's a very loose pantheon. It's not like Greek where it's like you very clearly have like
yeah.
Zeus is Athena's dad. You don't have that because they're not even human. They're not anthropomorphic. They're um, eldritch beasts beyond human comprehension, which is one reason I like that. I like horror fiction is because it can hint at things and your brain can scare itself easily. In this movie, they have to show stuff, which we'll get to later, but it arguably weakens thematically and just emotionally, like from a horror perspective, some of the like mystery of eldritch horror, and
I
that you
agree.
have to visualize it. You agree with that? Yeah,
Yes.
because they try to cut away and not show too much, but even then they show too much. I
Yeah.
think personally,
I think too.
um, and it reminds me that I'm watching a movie.
Yeah.
Because anyway, what I'm saying is basically the old ones were around before human civilization, and like them coming back to Earth to reclaim the Earth, like in this movie, is that is a real part of the universe in cosmic horror, and I think so in this universe. It's just that they're using an author as a conduit to retake Earth um from them in the way that like cultists in those other stories and the Call of Cthulhu are trying to serve Cthulhu or anything.
Well,
I
that's
don't want to get
cool.
too much into that, but
That's cool. I wish we could have like hinted a little bit more of that in this movie.
yeah, well, I think that's one thing I'm bringing to this movie that you aren't. I mean, you have a passing familiarity. You know who Lovecraft is. Like
Right.
you're not. But I as just as a guy who like read a lot of them when he was a teenager. Yeah, there's a lot of this. There's even stories like this that are stories that are told in flashback. There are stories told from insane people. Going insane is a huge part of cosmic horror. Because the whole idea is that cosmic horror came around in the 20th century, the pulps, right? So it came out of us making a lot of discoveries about psychology and about physics. We were learning about the atom and the microscopic worm. We were also learning about other planets and there's other galaxies. The Milky Way is not the only galaxy. Like the universe is way bigger than we ever thought it was. We're learning, all these other things about like atomics and stuff. That's a little later, but we're learning about these things that like humans have these like that we have a subconscious. That idea was like relatively new. The idea of a subconscious is, I mean, is that 100 years old even? Um, and so the idea that like we had these dark things in the recesses of our own mind, and that there's also this outer greater universe that like we cannot possibly comprehend. And in Lovecraft's fiction, particularly, and it's a staple of the cosmic horror genre, the more you learn about the nature of reality, the more insane you go, to the point where it's gamified in the mechanics of the Call of Cthulhu tabletop role playing game, and that you have hit points for health, and you also have sanity points that like you lose and will go insane.
Oh, okay.
Um, so I'm saying like the DNA. I mean, it's double helix intertwined with cosmic horror. It's so I'm bringing a lot to this movie and a lot of context to this movie that I think adds to it a lot, because even things like, oh, I'm going to this town and why are people acting weird? That's a shadow over Innsmouth. That's one of, I mean, that's a horror trope in general, you know,
Yeah.
like Texas Chainsaw, you're going on a road trip and here's a small like country town or like country highway stop and there's a barbecue shop, you know,
Yeah.
the horror trope. But a lot of it, this is more directly drawing a line to the originators of a lot of these tropes and referencing that, but seeming somewhat generic in some of those tropes because of it. But I wouldn't say it's critic proof for it. So that's a lot of context I just added for this movie. I know I just dumped all that,
Well, I
but
would say that you were talking about common horror tropes. Some of it kind of reminded me of Halloween 3,
oh yeah,
where it's like, okay, there's something going on, and like it's him and the woman, and they have to go to this small town. Things start acting a little weird, and then he like the guy in Halloween 3 is worried about the broadcast, and all the kids watching it and everything being corrupted, and like it's kind of like this guy and this movie's worried about everyone reading the book, you know.
right. This is almost like an inverted. It's like if the Satanic Panic was actually had a basis, like the Satanic Panic of the '80s, where people were like, "Don't read horror books, don't listen to heavy metal, don't play D&D," you know, all that stuff,
Yeah.
because they thought it was gonna turn into Satanists. This is almost like a hangover of that, or a response to that. I think by '94 it had died down a lot. You know, you still had your you know, evangelicals talking about stuff. You're always going to have that, but um, it's almost a reaction to that, because you have horror exploding in the world of this movie. Like grotesque horror is the most popular thing in all of fiction, more than anything. Which is really funny. Um, they shouldn't have named it. Yeah, they shouldn't have name dropped Stephen King. I agree with you there.
Nah.
I'm going back to then. They
Like
should have
what?
just kept it
Why?
as an unsubtle nod. No, just say he sells however much.
Yeah. But imagine though, like I I I love the shot where they're eating and you can see out the window as the guy slowly approaches with the axe in broad daylight, which is what's supposed to be in like New York City. It's such a striking image.
Right. Well, first of all, in New York, if you saw somebody on the street with an axe, you may not even clock it. You might even be like, "All right, it's
No,
just
I think
no." A guy with a big axe like that would be like, "What is this guy doing?" If you saw a guy dressed like that, looking like that, you wouldn't care. Like, yeah, it's a homeless guy. But if he had an axe, you might watch out. But which the way that shot is so interesting, because it's just them at the booth in this diner in the foreground, and then just in the background, it's in deep focus. You just see the guy walking up. It looks almost nonchalant, but that makes it scarier to me, because
yeah.
instead of having any like music stinger or Dutch angle or anything like that, just having this man trance like walk up in broad daylight, it makes it more uncanny and makes it feel more real. And this is a point in the movie where there is sort of a base reality still.
Yeah.
And then this goes. This was written in.
I was just laughing thinking of like this scenario if it happened in our reality. Like imagine how would you react if someone broke through and was trying to kill you with an axe and like they're like, "Have you read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets?" And you're just like, "What?"
No, no. What
This
if
guy's
that's how?
actually,
What if that's how librarians in this reality, like if you have overdue books, that's how they get you. They break in through your window with an axe, and they're like,
or
"Are
this
you
guy's just like,
are you finished reading Pride and Prejudice yet?"
or this guy's like sick and tired of adults reading children literature instead of reading
Which is
adult
he's like
literature.
a real snob, which is interesting because he's not like a literary guy. I think I wanted to know what he was reading. Was he just reading classics, or was he one of those people who's just like, I don't read fiction, you know? Which I hate. I hate you, by the way. If you're one of those people, you're probably not if you're watching this, but
Because
um,
yeah, he drops that. She's like, "We should read them." And he's like, "Do you have any on tape?" It's like, okay,
oh, he does say that, doesn't he?
yeah,
But there's a quote in this which I it's a famous it's on the top of the quotes at IMDb, which I only say because I wrote this down independently and then I learned that. But he says, we fucked up the air, water, we fucked up each other. Why don't we just finish the job by flushing our brains down the toilet? Like he's a real ass about it. That people are reading this. Because I don't love Stephen King, but like I don't besmirch people who read him, you know. He's better in a lot of stuff out there,
sure,
especially a lot of like popular stuff. You know, some of the stuff is garbage, but I wouldn't call it that. But it's also this idea of I think if you're that level of it's interesting if you're that level of like hyper atheistic, rejecting everything, um, you're also kind of denying your own humanity in a way. You know, your like base instincts, the idea that you would be drawn to this and like accepting that as part of your humanity, that you'd be drawn to like a trash horror novel. I think that's an important thing to accept, and maybe that's part of Trent's arc. Is that like, yeah, he learns to accept that reality isn't you know, fixed, um
yeah.
but he also accepts certain realities about himself. He accepts the ultimate reality about himself by the end of the movie, which spoilers, he is not real. But is he? I don't know, doesn't matter.
I will say that that reveal that he is part of the story and that he's fiction himself at first was really awesome. I was like, okay, great, I like this. But I felt like it kind of deflated as soon as like they show literal pages of the book behind him and he like looks out into the void and I was like, this like I don't know. That was just showing the literal pages of the book was too much for me in this kind of scenario. I feel like it if it was like trying to just be more straight up fantasy, then fine. Then more than the creature and psychological horror. I feel like tonally that would have worked more.
Do you
But
think it was going for creature and psychological horror, but by seeing the pages that introduce like a page master fantasy element that
yeah, I
clashed
thought it
with
was
the
too
rest of it?
much.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Which, by the way, a fun fact about I paused. This movie's free on YouTube, by the way, if you want to see it. But which is good because this is an underseen movie. It kind of broke even at the box office. 8-9 million domestic on an $8 million budget, which you know, even with inflation, it's not a huge budget. There's some scenes where they definitely use it, including this one we're talking about it. But when he's looking through that hole in the pages, which is very on the nose, I paused it and you can see the name of like some of the made up elder gods and stuff that are in this
Oh,
movie.
okay.
There are pause on there that have all very, you know, eldritch sounding names. Like I'm Yog Sothoth or something. That is a real eldritch god. That's not an example. Um, I don't know. I enjoyed it by that point. Part of me wonders like why does Sutton um why does Sutter Kane, that's his name, why does Kane need to write a character to deliver the manuscript to his publisher? Like, why, if he can write reality? See, this is where I start being like, well, what's the point of Sam Neill's character then? And why is he a doubting Thomas all this time? Is that just the author is writing it because that's the way he's writing it, or is this just some reflection of reality where like there is still some basic human psychology to the characters because they become real? So Trent is resisting the end of the world essentially because he is real and does live in the world because he becomes real, but he's resisting it, but he ultimately can't because he has no free will because he's a character.
Well, this guy didn't, I guess, didn't exist until Kane started writing the story.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is like this has to be able to rewrite base reality and not
Yeah.
just we're really good trying to think about the mechanics of how this works and who cares? I don't think John Carpenter cared. But not that he should have. I love you, John. Come play Halo with me. He plays Halo. But the the idea that like it affects a base reality because you have to rewrite other people's memories. Like the author writes Strider or whatever her name is, Liz. I don't know the woman. She writes them out of the publisher's memory.
Yeah.
You know who is Charlton Heston, by the way.
Which, yeah, it's crazy how much of an instant screen presence he has, even if he's not that big in the movie.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like just be even older Charlton Heston, not even trying to make a big presence for himself,
Yeah,
playing the character very, like straight, like a character actor would, not like a leading man would. Still has so much presence, just
I
being there
know.
because he's tall and handsome and has a square jaw and is just there
Yeah.
immediately. Oh, what a man! What a what an NRA director. Oh man, I love the NRA. But used to be chair of the NRA. No, so well, yeah, this has to be able to like rewrite people's memories and stuff, right?
Yeah. So that is an interesting like maybe it was just like it was going to be the next protagonist of his story anyway. I don't know. And so that's how it just is. It
And
is
maybe
because
there's
it
some
is.
lore where like, hey, you have to create some sort of like messenger or something to bring the message to these people. You can't just bring it yourself, you know. And I'm to the point where I don't even think that God, I keep forgetting Kane. I don't even know if Kane's a real person or if he's just completely a humanoid
No, I
manifestation.
think he's like a some sort of conduit of cosmic proportions.
Yeah, do you think he was a real person who became a conduit, or do you
Yeah, I
think
think he was. I think that
okay,
makes it more interesting to me that he was an author who got lost in the sauce,
yeah.
figuratively and literally.
Which Stephen King, and I haven't read a lot of Stephen King, but I know that in the Dark Tower series, by the time you get to the last book, it's revealed like the Dark Tower is the nexus of all of Stephen King's multiverse, and
Yeah.
he is like accepting inspiration from the Dark Tower and like from this other reality and channeling it into his work. Stephen King writes himself into his own stories like
Yeah.
it's
It's kind
like
of
he's
a prick, but
a
also it's
paperback.
something I would do too, so I
Yeah,
can't
it's
say
totally.
shit.
That's something you can see like Kevin Smith doing that in one of his movies. It's
God. Well, he already did. It's called Jay and Silent Bob Reboot.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a Kevin Smith thing to do. It's Kevin Smith got the Dogma rights back, and now I'm mad I didn't sell my Blu-ray while it
Me
was more
too.
expensive. I was gonna hold on to that for retirement. I should have known.
Oh well.
Oh well.
But I like the detail that I like the rationalization before they get to the place. It's like, oh well, Hobbs isn't a real place. Well, he's like, well, it might not be any on any modern maps. There's plenty of obscure towns that may have not made it onto certain maps because they're just out in nowhere. And that was just like a 20th century idea that is interesting to me, like before Google Maps and stuff. Like maybe there's a couple of obscure towns that got lost in the
Yeah,
process.
there's unincorporated communities and stuff.
Yeah.
That or like I don't know what they call them. Like but places like that, that's plausible. It is very 20th century. It's one of those things like because now you can look and there's like you'll find communities of like 10 people that'll be listed on the map.
Yeah, because I would last year when I had that gig where I was delivering medicine to pharmacies, I would go up in like northwest or northeast Arkansas deep into shit. And I'm like, how would anyone ever find this?
there's a lot of places like that in northeast Arkansas
Like,
specifically
okay, this
and
place is
south Arkansas.
20 people. And it was just strange because I was in a town of like 300 people and they had a Sonic and they had a Subway. And that Sonic to this day is the best Sonic I've ever had because it was so lax. There was never any lines because they only have like 300 people there. I'm like, how are you guys making money? But it's like they weren't rushed. They had time to make everything fresh, and it was like the greatest Sonic ever.
Right. But also that's the only restaurant in town. So that's
Yeah.
they gotta make sure it's good. Because what else do they have? It's that or Subway. You
I
know.
was like, how does that Sonic make money? I don't know. Maybe
Well,
truckers
yeah.
that go through
I
there.
mean, small towns are they're scary, dude. That's why we got Deliverance. That's why we got the Crucible. You got weird people living on the outside of town, witches, you know, because the kids are having orgies in the forest and the parents catch them and they have to make up a witch story to, and then stuff gets out of hands. That has to be what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We were told by the devil to do this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got major sundown town vibes, like Harrison, Arkansas vibes from this place when
Yeah.
they're there. Actually, I mean, I almost expected somebody, that guy with the shotgun, to be like, "You're kind of better, best be back in the city by sundown, city slicker," like something like that.
Well, Sam Neill's white, so it's
Yeah,
okay.
that's true. He's Kiwi, right? He's a New Zealander or something. No, that's why he's able. This movie would be a lot shorter if it was directed by Jordan Peele. Uh, It'd be Nope too. Somebody would roll up in this town and go Nope, and they leave. um, but they go to this hotel because for some reason the insurance investigator is investigating this disappeared guy. I mean, there's a lot of weird things that get insured. Like hand models get their hands insured for like $1 million, crazy
Yeah.
stuff like that. Um, so they go to the Pickman Hotel, which by the way is another Lovecraft reference based on his stories Pickman's model, which is kind of unrelated to these stories, but that's just another world.
Yeah.
Um, and then that's when the editor, that's who it is. She's an editor. Styles is like, I've read all this before because she's read it in
Yeah,
the
she
book.
suddenly knows every detail of like the town and
Yeah.
she's like there's a painting behind me and he's still like okay, whatever, and then she's like there's a floorboard loose and he steps on it. At that point I'd be like fuck this. I'm out of here. That's enough
Yeah.
for me right there, but he's still
Well,
like
that's when I started thinking like, oh, maybe they set this up, or maybe he's gonna say that. I
I
know
do
if
like
they don't.
that detail that she reveals that like yeah, at first this was a marketing stunt that we sent him out of town
Yeah,
to be missing or whatever, but he never actually came back. Like that's a crazy stunt to do.
yeah, but then also that stunt because Styles is either written into reality and then out of reality by Kane, or she was real and then was written out of reality later by Kane.
Yeah, I think it's the same one.
So maybe the entire marketing stunt was itself part of the plot of the novel.
Yeah.
This is where you can have these annoying tail eating conversations about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
movie.
Totally. If they did it
Uh,
today, they'd be like, well, actually, J.K. Rowling isn't actually transphobic. This has just been a marketing stunt for years.
a marketing stunt to like sell your books to old white guys
I
is
don't
not
know.
enough to them to alienate your audience.
Yeah, and then cause irreparable damage to the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, you to get people all of a sudden really caring about women swimming, as if I ever gave a shit about that before in my life. Like anybody ever watched a second of women swimming.
Yeah, she's
I was thinking that the
definitely
other day. What if Leah Thomas is just like marketing for women swimming? Like, not enough people were watching women swimming, and they're like, "Well, we could have them hate watch it if we do if we do
that's
this
fucked up.
and get some advertisers."
Yeah, the editor lady, she was a person because like when they drive into it, she's seeing like weird cosmic shit underneath the car and stuff, and she's
Yeah,
like, "What
weird
the hell's going on?"
bikers,
That cyclist who's
old
like,
people makeup biking. Which, by the way, this is it. It does actually pretty reflect pretty well what it feels like when you're drowsy driving,
"Yeah, totally,
when you're trying to stay awake while driving, and you're kind of like you're getting those micro sleeps where like you start to fall and then you jerk back asleep, and it's really scary, and you try to act cool so your friends don't know that you're putting their lives at risk.
yeah."
And then you ask me to pull over in Dallas while we go to the hotel because I'm getting tired. Um,
Sometimes I'll fucking slap myself in the fucking face.
I've done it, yeah. Um, you know. And if I die, that's fine. I don't want to kill anyone else like on the road. It does a good job of that though. That's it's part of the
Totally, yeah.
interiority is shown very well. I've never seen any crazy shit like that. And it is spooky when you just like you're there at your destination and it's daytime. You're like, did I sleep drive for like 4 hours? Yeah, Trent Sam Neill just wakes up. He's like, I slept all night. Thanks for driving.
Thanks. Yeah, but it's like also that one guy in the town, he's like, I can't remember at what point things changed, if it was before this or after this. And so it's like they were already rewritten by the time our characters showed up, and now but they're aware of like things have changed, but
Well,
they can't.
I don't know if you're talking about this. This is later, and then this is like 20 minutes past what we're talking about now. After they
Yeah.
get when there's the angry mob, and he's like being leaving and being teleported back and stuff. Where there's the old guy with the shotgun. He says, um, "I can't remember what came first, us or the book."
Yeah,
So
that's
even
right.
he doesn't know if he's a real person. The entire town is manifested out of this man's imagination or of the old one's imaginations. But then again, why are they manifesting this entire town? It's because they need to alter reality. I believe these are like beings that feed on reality and also kind of like old gods, pagan gods feed on the worship and belief of their admirers.
Yeah.
I've also heard the theory like the reason everybody goes crazy and the whole world goes crazy is they all realize that they're part of a book and or that they're part of a movie. And so when they realize the real nature of reality, they realize their characters. They just kind of their brain breaks.
Yeah.
Um, that happens with the whole world.
I really do like before everything breaks loose, the atmosphere of them walking around the empty town. It does
Yeah.
work really well. The
Where he
score
calls
was
it Main
fun.
Street USA.
Yeah.
He gets a Disney
But
reference in for you.
the real thing that ties it together for me is like this weird giant like church that is just so out of place with its architecture.
But by the way, that's that town and that church, they're really in the same area. That's actually a really
So
out of place
weird.
church. It's some Greek Orthodox church or
But
something.
to see
But
something of that level built just in the middle of nowhere is such like
would
so
be creepy.
creepy. Yeah.
And it's sometimes like when you go to through small towns on the edge of like county highways and all the houses are shit, but then they have a pretty nice church in the middle. You're like, well, that's where everybody's 10% goes. You can
I
tell.
it reminds me of well, it's like how do they get the money to have this level of building here anyway? But even with church funds, it's like these people make like $50 a week. I don't know.
I driving through those small towns, I'm baffled at what their
I
economy is.
wish Justin was on here for this episode because it totally reminded me of this amazing story he had where he was like driving in the middle of nowhere. I think like Kansas or something horrible, like, that straight path of nothingness that's miserable, but it's like a horrible storm, like tornado-esque storm came across. It was like really scary, and he found some small town and made refuge, like ran out of from his car because it was like dangerous. He ran to like this giant Catholic cathedral and was like banging on the door, like, let me in, help me. And the priest in there like took him into the basement of the church and let him seek refuge. And it was like, this is the most atmospheric, crazy thing you've ever told me, Justin.
That, I wouldn't trust that guy. I don't know. I don't trust that guy.
He said he had a good conversation with that guy.
Yeah, I bet he's nice. I bet he's a nice man of God who just
Maybe
wants
we'll
to.
have Justin on here again to tell that story in better detail. But that's what this kind of reminded me of. And I like the when those guys, the people approach the church with the guns. And what's the significance of the kid at the door and then it turns into the author?
I don't know. I think it's playing with horror tropes. I think
Okay.
it's playing with like here's the spooky old kid with otherworldly powers. What twins from The Shining, Firestarter,
Yeah, it
Carrie.
almost makes me feel like they're trying to make you think the movie's going to go in a different direction. Like this is a creepy town with some possessed kid or like Children of the Corn or something.
And then that kid becomes the author, Kane, who's the real villain. So maybe it's just
Yeah.
drawing an analog. Like in this
Yeah.
story, the creepy villain is the author.
Yeah, we
Like
figured it out.
the creepy kid with superpower. Do you think that's it?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, I think that's
The door it opens and closes too much stuff on that kid. It's almost like one of those YouTube poop edits where like I don't know, make it
it.
is I was like, okay, this is too much. Like have it swing open and close like one or two times, but don't do it
Yeah,
that much.
you thought like Skibbity Toilet was gonna pop up, and
Yeah, it just seemed like some stupid edit, but it was funny. But
there's definitely some YouTube poops you can make this movie of him yelling at the sound.
and
Ah!
then Sutter Kane appears and Sam Neill's character still thinks it's staged. Like,
Yeah,
could you imagine at that point being like, yeah,
at this
there's
point, it's a
nothing.
big production. I mean, people don't read like they used to, I guess, because I don't think publishing houses that have that much money to stage a fake town. Also, there's a comical amount of Dobermans in this scene.
Yeah.
Like at first, Kane sicks like three Dobermans on him. I'm like, okay, I can see somebody has three Dobermans. Then like six more Dobermans show up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did this guy get a kill streak in Call of Duty and it just called in the dogs? This is an absurd amount of dogs to not be at like a pride rally or something. I don't know. Maybe that's why this is a sundown town and that's why they had this many dogs. I don't know. Jesus. But I mean that again that leans it's almost comical but does lean into the unreality of he's summoning these dogs out of his imagination almost because he has reality warping powers.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
do like
Which is a
that.
lot like that old there's this old Twilight Zone episode, one of the early ones where there's an omnipotent kid. You know, have you seen that one? And he just like can delete people from existence and he can read everybody's mind. So everybody has to have positive thoughts all the times or else he'll delete you from existence.
That's
It's
terrible.
it's awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
I've watched a lot of old Twilight Zone,
I do
which
like that there
this reminds
at
me of.
least there is a ramp up in the kind of scary imagery because it's like, okay, that was weird. There's this church and there's this kid and this guy, and there's Dobermans, and then he goes into the back into the hotel and there's that I love that image of like the naked old guy chained to his wife's ankle. I was like, hell yeah, that's
With no
awesome.
real again, that's another thing that's not explained. It does feel like Carpenter just had a lot of horror imagery in his mind, and this is almost a movie that he could use as a basin to fill.
Well,
Um,
it had a slight setup because they mention she mentions like in the novel that that old lady murders her husband and it's like a psycho.
oh,
And he's
okay.
like, "Do you think that old lady down there is crazy? That is the nicest old lady I've ever met," basically, is what he said.
Yeah, and she says, "Don't smoke. It bothers my husband." I notice he never gets to smoke in this movie, if I'm
Poor
not
guy.
mistaken. He's always getting interrupted. Like
Yeah,
he
he
tries
gets
to
like one or
smoke,
two puffs. Yeah,
and then she puts his cigarette in the like coffee mug or whatever.
yeah,
You know, yeah, I keep wanting the guy to just smoke. I think he finally gets a few smokes in when he's in the asylum. Like it takes him all of that, and then Dr. Baxman Stockman from the Ninja Turtles gives him a cigarette.
yeah. He gets to smoke while he tells the story. Yeah,
Yeah, so there you go.
there you go. It's all worth it in the
It's
end.
all worth it.
When Linda, I think her name is the editor lady, when she goes
Yeah.
into Kane's lair inside the church, into like his inner sanctum or whatever, the walls and stuff reminded me of the architecture of like Daedric Towers inside of an Oblivion Gate, kinda. If you've never played the game Oblivion from 2006, people at home, you'd have to. I might put up a clip here.
Yeah, you can put up a clip. There's enough Oblivion video. There's video Oblivion videos of me with almost 100,000 views. Jesus
Oh
Christ.
yeah, well, but
We won't talk about that. That's for true fans to figure out. Um, I mean, yeah, you know, there's some Lovecraftian horror influences, especially among the Daedric realms in the Elder Scrolls. If you played Skyrim, Oblivion's the one before that. You casual. Um, it does that. You have the breathing wall, which I mean, and it's hard to because we covered possession on this cast. It's hard to when we start seeing some of the creatures and animatronics like that old lady when her husband becomes some tentacle monster that she has to chop off with an axe,
Yeah.
you know, inexplicably. When we started getting at that, and I see Sam Neill, it's hard not to think of possession. Um, and I would say this, you know, if we're going to arbitrarily compare the movies, this movie's not as good as Possession, but still pretty good. Both movies. I don't know if I call
Entertaining.
this a classic. I might call Possession a classic
Yeah.
for the genre.
Totally.
Um, this is a solid entry. Um, because yeah, then stuff starts really going. By night, it goes real crazy. Because what happens is she meets him in the inner sanctum, and she reads the whole story. She reads the rest of the manuscript that she hadn't read, and because she realizes it's all stuff from his new book. And that's what makes her go full crazy. That's what she becomes kind of indistinguishable from the rest of the town's mentality. You know,
Yeah, and then when
quite
she
literally buying into the herd mentality.
yeah, when once she gets rewritten, it's like, well, there's nothing we can do. She's gone, you know.
Yeah, she's children of the corn now. She's
Yeah.
one
I
of the
like
body snatchers.
I like the aspect of him trying to escape with his car, but he's stuck in this like kind of loop trying to get out of there.
Right. Which I first noticed because he sees the old lady on the now I'm trying to remember this part because this part's so chaotic and montagey and
Yeah.
psychological. I'm trying to get the chronology straight in my head. Um, but at first they're trying to get out of this. This is after the guy shoots himself for whatever reason. There's the angry mob he's trying to get away from. Styles punches him and then he knocks her out just
Yeah.
out of nowhere and then like picks her up like a sack of potatoes. They're trying to drive away and then finally she's like, Kane's writing me. He wants me to kiss you. So she's like trying to make out with him while he's driving. And there's a couple times in this where she's made advances at him that he's rebuffed. He's because he's just like, what are you doing? Kind of like if you really met this person, like in movies and TV shows, people like hook up very quickly or they'll like fall in love super quickly. And he's almost like she's in like storytelling logic where she falls in love quickly, and he's in real world logic where he's like,
Yeah, totally.
what are you doing? Why are you trying to kiss me right now? This is not the time. You
Because
know?
like I compared to Halloween 3 earlier, that's like in Halloween 3, him and the lady like hook up pretty quickly in that hotel room
Yeah.
in the small town.
Yeah.
So
But here it's like a more self-aware version of that. Now again, does being self-aware, like if you're working with certain tropes, does being self-aware about those tropes make those tropes better or more well utilized? Not necessarily. Um, but yeah, then he sees that girl and she's like stolen his keys, is trying to eat his keys. He happens to have a screwdriver that he can use in his glove compartment to hotwire his car or jumpstart it or wherever, which is another thing that seems like a plot convenience because it was written in by Crane. Like
yeah.
earlier, he just happens to have a squeaky horn that I thought was like an air horn, but it was a toy horn. He just happens to have it and like
Yeah.
blow it in her ear. I'm like, did Kane write that or did Carpenter, like, or whoever wrote this?
Yeah.
Michael De Luca, who sounds familiar, by the way. Let's look at his credits. Oh,
He's he's a
he
big
produced The Social
time
Network and Captain Phillips.
he's a big time executive producer at several companies. I think
Right,
one
but he started out writing, but this is I mean, honestly, one of the bigger things. Wrote the story on Judge Dredd. He wrote the screenplay for Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. So he wrote some
for
that.
an
He wrote a
executive who wrote a
lawnmower
movie,
man.
it could be a lot worse.
No, yeah, he's
Because it's like, okay, you know, I'm a fucking executive. I can do whatever I want. Here's a script. I'm gonna offer it to you, John Carpenter, if you want to do it. But like, I can get this movie made because I'm an executive, and we don't have to change. Probably, I don't know. It's just like what it must be like because a lot of executives seem to not understand fundamentals of important aspects of like
no.
storytelling and
I
stuff.
would feel if you had a few scripts behind you, even if they weren't amazing scripts. Although I enjoy this script and I haven't seen his other scripts, but like yeah, I would trust somebody. You know, if they had some sort of creative background in addition to a business one. He wasn't producing on this one though. I don't think it says
Yeah,
Sandy King produced, who was somebody
his
else.
wife,
Yeah.
John Carpenter's wife, produced it.
Oh, that's John Carpenter's wife. Oh, that
Yeah.
makes sense. I thought it was Stephen King's wife.
That would be crazy as hell.
What if Stephen King's ex-wife was like mad at him for being coked up and stuff, and being a shitty dad? So she just like made this movie.
That would make it more awesome.
Yeah.
to
So
me.
anyway, he keeps like teleporting back to which the first time, by the way, he's like trying to get away from. He shoves her out of the car. He tries to. I notice he just drives back to town. He drives back the direction he came from, but then he's trying to drive away, and he keeps teleporting back. And he's finally like, "Fuck this!" Tries to run over the crowd. She's in it. He panics, crashes his car, wakes up in a church in
Yeah.
confessional. Which is another one of those like, I mean, we've covered enough dream logic on here. And I feel like by this point, by watching this movie, it's just kind of going with it. You either accepted or rejected the movie by this point. We're about the midway point.
Yeah, you can't there's the story's already set now. He can't get out of it. It makes sense. Totally. And also there's plenty of dreams I've had where like I keep trying to get to this destination, but every little thing keeps popping up and getting in my way and like I can't seem to get to it and becomes like a stress dream. And then I wake up and I'm like, fuck this.
Oh no, I'm in church and there's a priest talking to me. I have that problem a
And
lot.
I'm in my underwear.
Then I'm
Oh,
in my
no.
underwear and I haven't studied for the test. Um, but yeah, but then some good shadow work. Kane is acting like the priest, and now here's where we get an exposition dump. That's even not that much of an exposition dump. It's basically like the more believers I get, the more real it is. And he's basically saying my book is bigger than the Bible. Like not enough people believe the Bible for it to be true, but people will believe my horror stories, which is that's a lot of ego. That's a lot. That's a lot. If an author told me that I'm bigger than
It's a little
it's
too
like
much.
it's like when John said the Beatles are bigger than Jesus. It's like okay, well,
I
nah.
don't think it had to be explicitly said and compared to the Bible for it to have the, I don't know, the way he says it. It's like, yeah, I get where you're going.
I think that's is that just to like upset '90s Christians watching the movie and make it feel spooky for them, like when
Maybe.
you were a kid and Molaram was talking about overtaking Christianity and that scared you
Maybe.
Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I do love. There's a few times in this movie where John Trent just goes, "Your book sucks. You're a hack." Like he's fed up with all the cryptic shit, and he's just like, "You're a hack, right? Your book sucks."
Yeah, what a sad, embarrassing way for humanity to go through like a boring, hacky horror novel.
I was thinking, like, what if my stand up dick jokes had this effect on people, where they like went insane? They all laugh so hard. It's like the end of this movie. They all laugh so hard they go insane. Or it's like that joke in that Monty Python sketch that's so funny that it kills people when they hear it, and then they have to translate it into and then read it to the Germans on the battlefield, so they all die. But none of the Americans know German, so it's okay. Or British people. It's like that. What Monty Python sketch does this movie remind you of, Adrian?
Um, I think there was a part where they talk about the movie adaptation, and well, he's like, first of all, I like the detail that Charlton Heston is like, what do you mean? There was never I never sent a woman with you. It's like, oh my God, like one of
No,
those.
that's a nice little twist. And he's like, "Oh, it's been published for 7 weeks."
But
Like,
it didn't make sense that he said like the book was coming out in a month later. Like, what are you talking about?
you mean that the movie and the book were developed at the same time?
Yeah, like when
If the
that
movie
wasn't
was coming out like right after the book, yeah, that never happens.
the only
Unless
time
somebody
that ever happened was 2001: A Space Odyssey.
right. You know,
But
we all know how that piece of shit turned out.
it's like, but I when they start talking about like, well, not everyone reads. He's like, well, there's a movie, and and in my head, I was like, what if the movie he's talking about is the one we're watching?
And of course it
And
is.
then it is. I'm like,
Yeah,
God
we
damn
know
it.
it is. First of all, and then also the unintentionally the score is very funny. When Charlton Heston is like, "Yeah, the movie's about to come out," and it's like, dun, 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 and Sam Neill's like cowering, like, "No, no, people will watch the movie. What if they're watching it right now and it's you?" Like, it almost has that tone to it.
The movie would have been better if it would have somehow implemented technology to turn on a secret webcam in my house to show me on screen watching the movie.
Yeah, if it hacked my webcam, which has duct tape over it when I watch movies.
Yeah.
um, but it's funny. I will say, by the way, he gets back, but he takes a bus back. but he's getting fucked with on the way back. First of all, I noticed the bus says Trentway on the back.
Oh, okay.
That's a detail I want to point out. And then in one of the funnier scenes, Kane's like, my favorite color is blue. And then he wakes up and everything's tinted blue and it's morning and everybody's wearing blue and he's screaming like that's the scariest thing. Everybody wearing blue. He's like, ah, and then he wakes up from another dream.
Yeah.
And he talks to a kid on a bike, and that kid
Yeah.
is Hayden Christensen,
That's no, I was like, oh shit.
which I didn't realize at first.
Me neither.
But then I looked at IMDb. I was like, what? And I looked it up on YouTube. I was like, oh shit, it's Hayden Christensen in the best acting of his career.
That was crazy because it was like you get to see him at the age he would be if he would have played Anakin in Phantom Menace if that would have came out at an earlier time, if he would have been in the movie somehow.
He could have done it. I don't know. It wasn't, but it was. He was too.
No, that was 94.
He was
So
94. I mean, you could have,
first of all,
know.
Anakin didn't have to be 9 years old. They could have, I don't know. Anyway, let's not get into
made
this.
him 12 or 13 or something.
Yeah, but whatever.
I think Anakin should have been a middle-aged man when they found him living with his
He
mom.
should have been like a digitally reconstructed Sebastian Shaw.
But with the 90s ILM tech.
Yeah.
He's like Jar Jar tech.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
I hope Dylan listens to this episode so he can see us come back to Star Wars somehow.
We do that all the time, man. Less than we used to, because Star Wars is, dying.
No one's talking about it anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So he's back in the real world, or what he thinks is the real world. And he's like, people will watch the movie. Bang, 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 just like Stephen King. How many people have actually read The Shawshank Redemption? Bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
And then he goes to that bookstore, and a guy's walking out of the bookstore having bought the book, and his eyes are already bleeding. There's even a part earlier in the movie where Sam Neill wakes up and he has I think it's the Sums. He has black goo or black ink on his eyes and hands.
Yeah.
The book is seeping into him, or maybe it's because he's made from the book. He's made of ink.
Oh shit.
That's why.
Maybe.
Yeah. This movie throws a lot of imagery at you in 90 minutes. Because when it hits that second half, once they get to town, the next 60 minutes it's kind of nonstop.
But how much of the imagery is fully thought out and how much of it is just having fun?
I think some of it is just dream imagery that Carpenter had, and this is a movie he could fit it into because of the nature of it being reality bending. But because it's complete reality bending, you lose that baseline reality to deviate from, so it all becomes sort of weird, but it's not a grotesque reflection of any sort of base reality. And therefore you could lose some of the horror element from it, one could argue.
Totally.
Kind of, and also, let's go back, because we didn't mention when he sees the gods, when he's running out of that church, out of some portal or some dimension.
Yeah.
And Linda can't come with him because she's in the sunken place. She already read the book. She can't do it.
Yeah, she's gone. It's over for
her. We don't see too much of the old ones. We just, because in cosmic horror fashion, the old ones are really a metaphor for forbidden knowledge and the unconscious. You can't show too much of them, or else when they become corporeal, they lose their power because they represent incorporeal concepts.
Okay.
So, by doing that, I don't know, it kind of feels like he's being chased by monsters in rubber suits a bit.
Yeah.
And he is, but it feels like it.
Yeah.
Because, and part of that's me bringing my own metatextual knowledge to this already metatextual movie of I know what these old ones are supposed to represent. And when they're just described in a horror story or novel, the description of a force of a being that is just a force of nature, it's almost scarier with the implication than it is actually physically representing that with something in a suit. It becomes a little Power Rangers-y.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah. That's okay.
Which is fine, but I like that sort of stuff. I
No,
just don't know if
totally.
it works for this movie
Yeah.
versus like a Cronenberg movie like The Fly, even. I don't know, where it's like kind of campy and goofy, or even like Videodrome, which this movie reminded me of because it's like similar era of horror special effects, contemporaries, and like Videodrome also have that layers of reality question. But overall, I feel that like that movie's a bit more consistent because it has more of an idea of what base reality is.
Yeah.
You deviate too far from base reality, then you're just floating. And that's what it can feel like later in this movie when he's attacking people at the bookstore with an axe because
Yeah.
the book's so bad. At one point, the king goes, "I'm God now." And he's like, "God's not supposed to be a hack horror." This guy's just like the world's angriest literary critic, just going to Barnes and Noble with an axe to like, "Stop reading Harry Potter. It's transphobic." Fighting off kids in wizards costumes.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, we gotta talk about how the ending of this,
Yeah.
how it's the same as Blazing Saddles.
Kinda.
It's exactly the same as Blazing Saddles.
Well, Blazing
So we,
Saddles, I think, is a little more effective because it's a comedy, a straight up comedy. And this was like, I got what they were going for, but I'm also like, well, this is. I was kind of joking about it in my head. Wow, this is the movie that we're watching right now is the movie that the people are watching, and then they just do it straight up. And I'm like, yeah, I should have seen this coming.
this feels like a long Twilight Zone episode. I
Yeah,
feel like that kind of twist at the end of 22 minutes of TV is like, oh, and it's the thing you're watching. It feels like that,
yeah,
almost like short story, sort of pulpy short story ending. But for this, I don't know how necessary it is as
yeah,
another twist or another layer of reality to it. Um,
yeah. I thought it was already
and part
implied
of it,
enough.
I think part of it is like commenting on how fiction, including movies, affects our own perception of reality. Um, I always say, how many people's perception of like what a criminal is or what a psychopath is affected by like Silence of the Lambs, or or how people's idea of what romance and courtship is affected by movies. But he kind of like goes into this idea of how like fiction affects reality and vice versa, but like it doesn't really delve deep enough into those themes for me to like comment upon any commentary that it may have. It just
That's
kind of
what I. That's how I
it,
feel.
it, it uses it as set dressing, but I don't know if it's actually trying to say anything other than that, just saying that fiction can influence our reality.
But still pretty ahead of 30 years ago, the media landscape was a little bit different.
No, being that sort of metatextual in this very 90s movie in a good way. And by the end of it, we get this. It's almost 28 days later. He's like walking, everything's empty, and very intelligently using their budget. I think describing things is underused in movies sometimes. Describing things via dialogue versus showing them, which is I know is the opposite of show don't tell, the most basic advice. But I've been thinking a lot recently about that scene from Citizen Kane where what's his name, the guy who's like chairman of the board, older guy or whatever, is talking about the lady in a white dress he saw on a ship once years, and he still thinks about her 60 years later or whatever. How that entire scene is just dialogue, yet it, through its language and through the performance, like that mixed together, it's still able to feel cinematic, even though it's not showing you anything. Um, and it made me think a lot about that in terms of horror, and especially cosmic horror. If you're going to do it um, from a cinematic perspective, like how do you not show stuff? And at the end, where they have that radio broadcast and the guy's describing madness overtaking the world, every civilized country, there's fires in the streets, and this movie with an $8 million budget didn't have to, it couldn't show you that, but just being able to imply it and make it seem grander reminded me kind of like the Warriors, how there's that radio broadcast that makes the movie scope
Yeah,
so much grander than it is. Obviously, you can't have, I mean, maybe you can, but you can't have radio broadcasters throughout the whole movie. You can't just have an audiobook on a screen. Um, but it seemed like a good medium because it's still cinematic because he's walking around and it's
sure.
empty,
And it
performing.
fits. It's not like it's a narrator telling us.
Right, right, right.
That totally works.
And then he sits down, uh, stops in the apocalypse, goes and gets a bucket of popcorn. I assume there's no usher, and the projectionist is still working though. And he sneaks behind the counter and gets a bucket of popcorn for himself before he sits down.
Yeah, wouldn't you?
And find, yeah, I mean, if nobody was manning it, I would. That popcorn's expensive. I normally don't get any, but I
Yeah,
love it.
don't criticize that. Then we're gonna get into some cinema sins bullshit.
No, no, no. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
This is like, I'm surprised he didn't have a Coke too. Maybe he's diabetic. He doesn't need it. I don't know.
They don't have Diet Coke there.
It's like, ah, they're out of Diet Coke. Okay. I don't, well, my doctor says I need to watch my sugars because that's how he talks in this movie, right?
Yeah. He ends the film talking about being aware of your sugar.
No, he just ends laughing at himself.
No, he ends it talking about dangers of sugar consumption and switching to Diet Coke.
Yeah, dude. Children of the Corn is really about the corn industry introducing high fructose corn syrup to hook our children on their product.
I do like that. What?
I enjoyed this movie.
Yeah.
I think you did too. I think I might have enjoyed it a bit more, and part of that is like what I brought to it. But that's also just because I'm a fan of this subgenre of horror. This is my favorite subgenre of horror. It touches on a lot of my favorite stuff.
Sure.
You know, I mean, and the influence, like the phrase Arkham Asylum is not from Batman. That's from Lovecraft. Arkham was a town, fictional town in Massachusetts, much like the town we see here. And like there's an asylum in there called Arkham Asylum. So like the impact on pop culture is not just in this, it's throughout everything, both horror and not.
Yeah, I had a good time. I think the last third gets a bit schlocky in a few areas, but
it does get schlocky and
arguably fun time.
Schlocky, but it's
I
fun.
I don't think the movie. I obviously that's what it was building towards. Him watching the movie. I like him laughing at the insane absurdity of it all. That's fine.
And Sam Neill sells it. He sells everything.
He sells it. You definitely elevate it with your knowledge that you bring. Yeah, it kind of like reminds me of like when me and Casher talked about we're all going to the World's Fair because he did not get that movie at all, and it was very. I liked it because I very specifically have a lot of terminally online knowledge of fucking creepypastas, YouTube, analog horror, and stuff like 3 a.m. challenges, stuff like that. And even though it's
also about the World's Fair. You're also in the World's Fair.
Well,
right?
it doesn't really have anything to do with the World's Fair.
But you know a lot about the World's Fair, though.
It's true, I do know about several World's Fairs.
Because you reference specific World's Fairs in conversations with me. And you're like, Scott, it's like the 1931 World's Fair.
No,
you were there. And I'm
like,
no,
World's Fair.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But no, and speaking of World's Fairs, I wish that Devil in the White City would have not been canceled. That Scorsese was going to produce it. I think Keanu Reeves was going to be in it. And,
what was it?
Devil in the White City. It was about a real life. It's a novel about a serial killer at I think the St. Louis World Fair. I think, or one of them.
That sounds cool.
And it was a real thing that happened, and he was killing people at this World's Fair. And
we can make that.
But that has nothing to do with what I'm saying is like very specific cases where certain films can be way elevated by background knowledge. And,
of course. But and maybe part of the problem of this movie is like it didn't communicate that to a general audience. It was inspired by these things, but these things were more niche at the time. You had to really be into horror literature, I guess, versus it's been popularized with like the internet and just being able to discover more obscure stuff and like being able to trace the influence of certain things.
Yeah.
I will say like this movie, it got a lot of these psychological aspects of the genre right. A lot of adaptations. I don't like people just leaning into the pulp aspect and like the pulp action because then they're just deriving things from things derived from the genre and not the originators. It's like basing things off of Star Wars instead of basing things off of the samurai films that Star Wars was inspired by.
Yeah, totally. Buck Rogers. But also, no, I get that. And it's like, I don't know. You could keep breaking things down, I guess. And it all goes back to the Odyssey, but whatever.
I mean, yeah, if we want to keep talking about the lineage of stuff, yeah, he's going to an unknown place. It's a road movie, and you know what else is a road story? The Odyssey, baby. The
Yeah.
ultimate buddy road movie.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up our discussion on In the Mountains of Madness. No, I'm just kidding. In the Mouth of Madness. Um, John Carpenter. We've talked about The Thing. I don't think we've talked about any other of his films.
No, I don't think
We've done
so.
so many episodes now that I'm like, wait, did we? No, we haven't
I
done.
was having that trouble too. We've done Halloween 3, which is not him, right?
Yeah, we've done Halloween 3, which is a
We
GA
I
thing.
need to rewatch Halloween 1 because if you don't know this audience, I'm a bit ho hum on Halloween 1. But also, I think about it. I watched that movie the day I got dumped. I got dumped on Halloween and it was
Yeah.
playing in theaters, and then I saw it. And so I was not in a great mood. So I should probably give that movie a shot in a better
Well, they're
headspace.
showing it at Ron Robinson later in the month. It'd be fun to see it with an audience and just appreciate the novel simplicity of the film.
It's so simple. Halloween is so simple.
And that's why I
It's
like it.
and it's amazing. Well, that's comparing it to this. Like, I can see why if you're a John Carpenter fan, and he had been, famous. Halloween was 78. This is 94, so he'd been famous for 16 years at this point. But if you're a John Carpenter fan, now ideally you caught some of his movies leading up to it, so it was less of a shock. But I can see like if you were, going into this movie from the creator of Halloween, expecting that, yeah, you wouldn't like it probably. If you're a teenager trying to go see
Depends.
it depends.
Because like right after that he made The Fog, and then in '82 he made The Thing. The Thing is pretty, comparable with the effects and
Yeah.
stuff.
He wrote Escape from New York. He made Escape from New York.
Yeah, he made Escape from New York.
Completely
Just
different.
They Live was a couple years before this one, and that one gets pretty out there with its
Yeah.
ideas. So
And Big Trouble in Little China was also before this. So
it's
what's
comparable.
interesting, this is part of his Apocalypse trilogy. This is the third.
Yeah.
He calls it and then the thing is the first. I guess because they're all potentially apocalyptic threats.
Yeah.
And then I forget what the second one is.
It's I think Prince of Darkness.
It's Prince of Darkness. I have not seen that one.
That's one of the few I haven't seen. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen Ghosts of Mars, which I heard sucks. I haven't seen Starman or Christine. Those are the ones I need to watch. Oh, and Dark Star, his
Yeah,
very first.
Carpenter is one of those directors. You look at his filmography; he's a lot more prolific than you remember. It's just
Well,
you know some of
I was
it's
pretty. I'm pretty aware of his different like banger after banger kind of like run he had with like Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, the Thing, all
yeah.
back to
But then
back.
1983, you get Christine, and you're like, oh yeah, he directed some movie about a what was it, a haunted car? I don't know.
Yeah, Starman. I
Yeah,
have
yeah, exactly.
I
Stuff
have
like
that one
that.
downloaded.
Um,
I need to rewatch Big Trouble in Little China. I didn't appreciate it fully, I think, the first time I watched that movie.
hell, I may watch that later tonight. Screw it.
But anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Next week we'll be back with either Casher to do The Omen or Dylan to do Cure, Japanese horror film. One of those two, and it depends on scheduling. So look forward to that. If you want to support the channel, I have a book for sale that I wrote, coming of age story based on stupid shit I did when I was 11th grade. We also have tie-in film on our other channel, The Morning Line, which has all kinds of short films and feature films that I've made over the years. If you want stuff that isn't just The Harbor, we have over 150 episodes of The Harbor. If you like this one, go watch the Thing episode. That was a banger. If you want more Carpenter discussions, I have a new video essay out about YouTuber movies. Go check that one out. I had a lot
It's
of fun
good.
making that. And you can follow Scott at Scott K Comedy. And you can follow me at The Morning Line if you
We're in
want to
Little
see
Rock on the
me.
28th. I'll be doing a roast battle at the Looney Bin Comedy Club. Check it
There you
out.
go. Other than that, I guess we'll see you guys next week.